All right, boys and girls, I think it's recording. What we're going to do is this video is to kind of give you a jump start on simplest form. We just became experts on finding the biggest hammer to knock it into simplest form. Now we're going to actually learn how to use that hammer to knock that fraction down to the easiest possible way to say your final answer. And all you need to remember is everything is simple. Everything is simple when you draw an F. That is correct. So let's go ahead and turn these fractions into simplest form. One thing that we need to know is, how do we know when we're done? Are we definitely like in its simplest form? We know simplest means most simple. We don't just want it to get easier, we want it to be the easiest. So the question that we're going to ask ourselves, if we think we're in simplest form, is are you one and done? And if you notice, the word one is in the word done, which I think is super clever. So there are 3 different ways to be one and done, meaning you are done definitely in simplest form. One way is when you put a fraction into simplest form, it is definitely in simplest form if the numerator of the fraction is a 1. For example, if you have the fraction 1/3, we can't hammer a 1 any further down. It's the smallest number you can find in the numerator of a fraction. So if that numerator is 1, then you are done. It is definitely in simplest form. Okay, that's one way to be one and done. So 1/3 would be an example, 1/8 would be an example, 1/2 would be an example. Any fraction with a numerator of 1 is done, simplest form. Another way is if your numerator and your denominator are 1 apart. So for example, if I have the fraction 2/3, if you look at the numerator and you look at the denominator, they're only 1 apart. When I'm counting, I say 1, 2, 3. They're right next to each other. So if they are 1 apart, just like this, we are one and done. Another example, 7/8. 1 and done. You are 1 apart there. Another example, 11/12. The numerator and the denominator are 1 apart. If that's the case, you are definitely one and done. Now, worst case scenario is number 3, because it just requires a little bit of work. If you find that the greatest common factor is a 1. That means the only hammer that can work is a 1. You can't really hammer it down because a 1, whether you multiply or divide a number, won't change it. So if the GCF is 1, then you are done. For example, if you have the fraction 3/10, if I do the F and for the greatest common factor and I do 3 and 10, the factors of 3 are 1 and 3, and since it's prime, that's it. And 3 doesn't work because there's nothing times 3 that makes 10. Because that greatest common factor is a 1, you know you're done. So we're always going to be asking for evidence. How do you know you're in simplest form? Are you one and done? So let's go ahead. We're going to practice finding the GCF and then using it to put a fraction in simplest form. So you get an answer of 6/18. We want to, I got to pause that. Hold on. Sorry about that, phone call. All right, so we're going to go ahead and we're going to take our final answer here of 6/18 and put it in simplest form. Everything is simple when you draw an F. The first thing we need to do is find the biggest hammer. So we're going to go ahead and find the greatest common factor of 6 and 18. So we only need to find the factors of one of our numbers. We're going to use the smaller one because it'll be easier. So that would be 1 and 6 would be my bookend factors. 6 is even, so 2 and 3 also work. And the next number I would try is 3. It's already there. So I'm going to go ahead and start at the greatest hammer and see if it'll work. And I do know that 6 times 3 makes 18. So I can use this hammer for both. So I'm going to go ahead and put the greatest common factor right there. And right now this is the hammer that I'm going to use to hammer down my original fraction of 6/18 into its simplest form. I'm going to use, instead of division, we're going to use our multiplication brain. So I'm actually going to put multiplication man here. And he's going to help our thinking to figure out our new numerator and our new denominator. Instead of thinking division, I'm going to think, okay, 6 times what? I'm going to actually go diagonal here. 6 times what is going to get me to 6? Well, I know it's 6 times 1 is 6. And then I also need to do the same thing here. 6 times what is 18? Well, we already said it's 3. So what we've just created from 6/18 is a new fraction of 1/3. And if you take a look, we need to decide, are we one and done? Do any of these 3 categories work? And in this case, yes, I can see, check, since our numerator is a 1, I am confident that my fraction is in simplest form. Okay, so let's go ahead and try another one. Everything is simple. Everything is simple when you draw an F. I'm first going to put 10/15ths here. And step 1 is to find the biggest hammer I can use to hammer down the numerator and the denominator. I'm going to list the factors of 10 up above here in my toolbox. 1 and 10 are my bookends. 10 is even, so I know 2 is going to work. I know 2 times 5 is going to be a factor partnership there. There's nothing times 3 that makes 10, and nothing times 4 makes 10, and there's 5. So these are all my hammers in my toolbox. I need to find the biggest hammer that will also work for 15. There's nothing times 10 that makes 15, but we do know that 5 times 3 can make 15. So 5 is going to be my biggest hammer. So right there's the hammer that I'm going to use to hammer down 10/15ths into a fraction in simplest form, I hope. So I'm going to use multiplication man to help me think. So here we go. 5 times what is going to make 10? Well, 5 times 2. And I already did that work up here. 5 times 2 makes 10. And now I need to figure out what 5 times what makes 15. Well, we already said it's 5 times 3. 5 times 3 would make 15. So we hammered down the 10 to make a 2. We hammered down the 15 to make a 3. So this becomes my new reduced fraction. The question is, did I reduce this fraction to its simplest form? So we're going to go ahead and enlarge our checklist here. Are we 1 and done? I do not have a numerator that is a 1. My numerator is a 2. That one doesn't work. But if you take a look, I can check this 1 and done. My numerator and my denominator, they're 1 apart. 2 and 3 are 1 number apart on a number line. So I am definitely done. This fraction in simplest form is simply 2/3. Let's try one more. Everything is simple. Everything is simple when you draw an F. My son would tell me never sing in front of your students, so I apologize. First thing we need to do is find the hammer that we can hammer both of these numbers down with. We're going to use our smaller factor. So 1 times 6 is going to be my bookends, and 2 times 3, and there's nothing that fits in between there. So the biggest hammer, let's see, there's nothing times 6 that makes 20, because 6 times 3 is 18 and 6 times 4 is 24. So that cancels that out. There's nothing times 3, because 3 times 7 is 21. I'm just past that. But I can use the hammer of 2, because I know that 2 times 10 makes 20. So now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to use that hammer. This is the biggest hammer I think I can use. And I'm going to hammer down my numerator first and then my denominator. So when I hammer down my numerator, I know 2 times 3 makes 6, and I can see that right up here. It's already done. Now I need to figure out what happens when I hammer down the 20 with the 2. So 2 times 10 makes 20. So now I have my new reduced fraction. It is dealing with smaller numbers. I have 3/10. And we need to figure out, are we 1 and done? So, okay, got to go through my checklist. My numerator 1, no, that's not true. My numerator is a 3. Are my numerator and my denominator 1 apart? Well, 3 and 10 are not next to each other on the number line. That's not going to work. But is the greatest common factor a 1? Well, in order to find out if the greatest common factor is a 1, I need to draw another F. Because I've reduced this fraction, it gets to be a smaller F because my numbers are smaller. And I'm going to try and find the greatest common factor of my new fraction to make sure the greatest common factor is 1. What's nice is 3 is a nice small number. It's also a prime number. It only has 2 factors. 2 doesn't work. Is anything times 3 equal to 10? No. And so you can see here my greatest common factor of my numerator and my denominator is 1. So I am 1 and done with that criteria. So hopefully that gives you an input into what we're going to learn about next, putting fractions into simplest form.